Hello, my name is Roger Main. On behalf of Pam Zabel, Carrie Leadham Larson, Jim Roth, Jeff Zimmerman, and myself at the Iowa State College of Veterinary Medicine, it is our pleasure to provide you an overview of a recently completed case study entitled, "Is it Time for an NPIP-like Program for the U.S. Pork Industry?" As your time and interests allow, we would encourage you to review the entire case study report, which provides for a more comprehensive summary than feasible in the following presentation. We would first like to acknowledge and thank the many NPIP subject matter experts and U.S. poultry and egg industry stakeholders as shown here that graciously aided our efforts in this case study. We would also like to thank Dr. Jens Kier, who helped arrange for some conference calls with swine industry colleagues in Denmark and the Netherlands that have similar swine health control programs in their respective countries. Additionally, we would like to thank a small group of individuals with representation from the poultry and pork industries, state veterinary medical officials, veterinary diagnostic labs, and the USDA who aided in an initial review and critique of this case study report. And finally, a special word of thanks to the Swine Health Information Center for the provision of financial support that aided in the completion of this case study. So with that, let's get started. What does NPIP stand for? NPIP is an acronym for the National Poultry Improvement Plan. NPIP is an industry, state, and federal partnership that has long played a central role in bettering the health of U.S. poultry and the competitiveness of the U.S. poultry and egg industries. Our case study had three primary objectives. The first objective was to seek an in-depth understanding of the NPIP, what it is, why it exists, how it works, how it has evolved over time, and to provide some insight as to why it works for the U.S. poultry and egg industries. The second objective was to clarify how NPIP differs from and complements the secure food supply plans for the U.S. poultry and egg industries. And the third objective was to assess the needs and potential applications for establishing a similar program for the U.S. pork industry, i.e., the U.S. Swine Health Improvement Plan. So what is NPIP? NPIP is a cooperative industry, state, and federal program that serves to safeguard, certify, and represent the health of U.S. poultry. NPIP is actively implemented across all segments of the U.S. poultry and egg industries. Participation is voluntary and essentially universal among commercial operations. NPIP health status classifications are the official recognized standard for representing the health status of U.S. poultry. NPIP's health status classifications are used to demonstrate freedom of both trade and non-trade impacting diseases. So how does NPIP work? NPIP is a working and very active system of animal health control whose program's content and direction are informed and updated every 2 years by a formal congress of industry stakeholders and subject matter experts. The NPIP is coordinated by the USDA, administered by the NPIP official state agencies, and implemented by program participants across all 50 states and the U.S. territory of Puerto Rico. What does NPIP do? NPIP approves diagnostic test methods, determines the requirements for specified NPIP health status classifications, certifies diagnostic laboratories, and maintains and verifies the status of program participants. The list of NPIP participants and the various NPIP health status classifications held are housed on the NPIP website under the Participants and H5H7 Avian Influenza Monitor tabs. So how do participants use the NPIP? Participants utilize the NPIP to certify the health status of U.S. poultry and egg flocks and hatcheries, eggs and chicks, slaughter plants, industry segments, and states in accordance with the NPIP's officially recognized standards and definitions. While participation in NPIP is voluntary, specified NPIP health status certifications are commonly required at points of sale, exhibition, and for interstate and international commerce. So why does NPIP work? In these authors' opinion, the following are critical elements to NPIP's long-standing history of success. Number one is its operational structure or model of operations that leverages the expertise and industry-specific know-how that exists across the breadth of the industry participants to more directly and continuously address poultry health-related items of high relevance to the U.S. poultry and egg industries over the course of time. Number 2 is the critical mass of participation that has grown to be almost universal amongst commercial producers and poultry slaughter facilities in the U.S. And number 3 is that the NPIP provides clear, practical, and uniform definitions and standards that are used for reference across all 50 states. And number 4 is that the NPIP's health status certifications are internationally recognized and carry with them the USDA seal of approval. The pictorial shown here, entitled Partnering to Safeguard and Better Animal Health, is our best effort to most succinctly describe NPIP's ongoing system of operations across the U.S. poultry and egg industries. In short, a formal congress of industry stakeholders and subject matter experts define and continually update the program. USDA Veterinary Services coordinates the program and maintains the program documents. Official state agencies adopt and administer the program to meet the needs of the industries in their state, and program participants, meaning producers and packers, implement the program in accordance with the certifications they hold. The circular nature of the relationships between the Congress of Industry Stakeholders and Subject Matter Experts, the USDA Veterinary Services, and the official state agencies and program participants provides for the continuous improvement and updating of the program over the course of time. NPIP's origins date back to the 1930s. NPIP was initially started in 1935 to eradicate pullorum disease. Pullorum disease is a vertically transmitted disease that was causing significant losses in affected flocks during that time. After the development of a diagnostic test capable of identifying infected birds, individuals within the poultry industry recognized the most effective way to control pullorum disease would be through a coordinated nationwide effort. As shown here, NPIP's scope and the number of health status classifications held by participants have continued to evolve and expand over the course of time. NPIP's primary focus, dating back to its origins, centers on certifying breeding poultry as being free of specified vertically transmitted diseases of high consequence. This slide illustrates the number of diseases within NPIP scope and the associated health status classifications for the various types of breeding poultry. These pathogen-specific NPIP health status classifications for the various types of Salmonella, Mycoplasma, and avian influenza are broadly recognized and represent the foundation by which the health status of breeding poultry and their offspring are characterized at points of sale, exhibition, and for interstate and/or international commerce. While NPIP's primary history and focus are deeply rooted in the control and elimination of vertically transmitted diseases of breeding poultry, NPIP scope expanded significantly in 2006 to include an H5H7 avian influenza monitored classification. This classification was the first and still the only NPIP health status classification for commercial poultry. A disruptive outbreak of low-path H7N2 avian influenza in the Shenandoah Valley in North Carolina in 2002, followed by a more isolated outbreak of high-path H5N2 avian influenza in Texas in 2004, and coupled with increasing avian influenza concerns around the world and the growing importance and value of export markets to the U.S. poultry and egg industries, each contributed to this significant change in NPIP scope in 2006. Because high-path avian influenza is considered a foreign animal disease, response plans are outside the scope of the NPIP. Nevertheless, the H5H7 avian influenza monitored classification provides participating commercial poultry operations in states and regions not affected by an avian influenza outbreak of significance, an officially recognized mechanism for demonstrating freedom from disease. The H5H7 avian influenza monitor classification, held by meat-type chicken and turkey slaughter plants, commercial table egg laying operations, and states, have played a primary role in helping sustain export market access and ongoing interstate commerce in unaffected regions during times of an avian influenza outbreak of significance affecting commercial poultry in the U.S. The NPIP has a very active, organized, scientific, and democratic process for vetting proposed modifications and updating the NPIP. Recent updates of significance include the requirement that commercial operations have a biosecurity plan in place, and more recently, language related to virulent Newcastle disease was added to the program in 2018. The first update was prompted by the lessons learned from the 2015 high-path avian influenza outbreak centered in the upper Midwest, and the latter by concerns over the recent virulent Newcastle disease outbreaks in the state of California, and as well as to broaden the scope of NPIP's compartmentalization efforts. Consistent with the guidelines set forth by the World Organization for Animal Health, or OIE, NPIP has also recently been providing leadership towards developing a pathway for poultry operations to become officially recognized compartments. Through this effort, a primary breeder operation, Avigen, became the first commercial livestock or poultry operation in the U.S. to become an officially recognized compartment in 2018. This status positions operations to export their offspring or products during a time of an animal health crisis in the U.S. or in their state or region. Other U.S. primary breeder operations that distribute poultry genetics domestically and abroad are further exploring the option of becoming an officially recognized compartments to support the future of their operations. Commercial poultry are not presently pursuing this OIE-level compartmentalization due to the costs, complexities, and feasibility of achieving this high standard. It should be recognized that compartmentalization, meaning demonstrating evidence of freedom of disease from specific sites or operations within an affected region, is distinct from and far more difficult than regionalization. Regionalization involves demonstrating evidence of freedom of disease in unaffected or no longer affected areas, states, or regions. The U.S. and other trading partners have a history and precedent for respecting and honoring regions within an affected country as being free of specified diseases. Disease control efforts within the U.S. and throughout the world have long designated health status by region over the course of large-scale disease control and eradication efforts. Regionalization has the potential to be far more broadly applicable and feasible at a commercial level as compared to the much higher standard and rigor associated with the guidelines for compartmentalization set forth by the OIE. However, it should be clearly understood that diagnostic testing, traceability requirements, and sanitary standards are each critical components necessary for demonstrating evidence of freedom across supply chains, industry segments, areas, and regions. We're now going to transition to discuss how the NPIP is administered and implemented. The NPIP national headquarters and its 5 USDA employees are located in Conyers, Georgia. Locating and operating NPIP's small national administrative office in a poultry-centric region of the country is of importance to U.S. poultry and egg industry stakeholders. Many international visitors and trading partners visit Georgia to learn and better appreciate the poultry health control programs and poultry and egg industries in the U.S. The NPIP National Headquarters, the Georgia Poultry Lab Network, the Poultry Diagnostic and Research Center at the University of Georgia, the USDA Southeast Poultry Research Laboratory, and a myriad of commercial poultry operations are all within reasonable proximity for such visitors. The NPIP Senior Coordinator is the senior administrator and provides leadership for NPIP's activities at a national level. The NPIP General Conference Committee consists of 7 elected individuals who provide oversight and industry representation in the NPIP administration. General Conference Committee members are volunteers elected to 4-year terms at the NPIP Biennial Conference and serve as the official advisory committee to the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture on matters pertaining to poultry health. The NPIP Senior Coordinator reports directly to the USDA-APHIS Director of Avian, Swine, and Aquatic Health Programs. The NPIP Technical Advisory Committee consists of a diverse group of subject matter experts from across the U.S. that play a significant role in vetting and, in some cases, crafting proposed updates to the NPIP. The technical committee consists of veterinarians, diagnosticians, microbiologists, and epidemiologists, and has working groups within it, often focused on specific pathogens, specific health status classifications, or particular areas of the NPIP. The NPIP official state agency is the state authority recognized by the USDA to cooperate in the administration of the NPIP. Determination for participation in the NPIP is on a state-by-state basis. Currently, all 50 states and the U.S. Territory of Puerto Rico have a memorandum of understanding with the USDA and participate in the NPIP. Each NPIP official state agency must implement the NPIP as stated in the Code of Federal Regulation and the NPIP Program Standards document. However, participating states can adopt and follow additional state-specific poultry health-related requirements that extend beyond the NPIP-associated claims, requirements, and standards in accordance with their state animal health administrative rules. However, states commonly reference, adopt, or defer to the definitions and standards set forth by the NPIP. The National NPIP Office manages USDA-APHIS poultry health program matters. They maintain and update the NPIP official program documents. They maintain a list of the NPIP participants and classifications held from the information provided to them from the participating states, and they provide support to the NPIP official state agencies. While the NPIP is nationwide in scope, each NPIP official state agency operates and administers the program in a manner that best meets the needs and interests of their respective states' poultry and egg industries. This includes working with their poultry and egg industry associations, state animal health officials, and State Department of Agriculture to determine an operating and personnel reporting structure that works best for their state. NPIP official state agencies are typically housed within the State Animal Health Officials Office, the State Department of Agriculture, the State Poultry and Egg Industry Association, or the state-affiliated veterinary diagnostic lab. The heavy lifting involved in executing the NPIP is done by the NPIP official state agencies and the NPIP participants themselves. The NPIP official state agencies maintain a list of the active NPIP participants, a database of all the participants' site-specific information. They verify the participants are meeting the specified requirements of the classifications held or being applied for to attain, and they maintain an up-to-date list of the NPIP classifications held by each participant in their respective state. NPIP participants implement the program requirements specific to the NPIP classifications held and are responsible for demonstrating the attainment of the specified requirements on an as-needed basis. So we're now going to transition to discuss a little bit about the NPIP program documents, and specifically starting out with where they housed. The NPIP program definitions and affiliated documents are housed and detailed in the Title IX of the U.S. Code of Federal Regulation and in the NPIP Program Standards document. The NPIP maintains links to these documents on their website. The NPIP program requirements to achieve each of the specific NPIP health status classifications are given in the 9 CFR for breeding poultry in Part 145 and commercial poultry in Part 146, respectively. The details of the NPIP approved test methods and NPIP-related sanitary standards have historically been maintained in the 9 CFR. However, more recently, the NPIP Program Standards document was created as a standalone document outside of the 9 CFR in an effort to streamline the process of keeping the provisions current with the best technologies and practices available. So we're now going to transition to discuss how the NPIP program documents are informed and updated. The NPIP program documents are informed and updated every 2 years by a formal Congress of industry stakeholders and subject matter experts at the NPIP's biennial conference. If more urgent industry-related issues arise, the NPIP General Conference Committee can approve proposed changes to the NPIP on an interim basis, in accordance with the standards that are set forth in the 9 CFR. However, all such interim changes are brought forth for an official review, consideration, and vote at the next NPIP biennial conference. The NPIP has a very active and well-defined process for updating the NPIP program documents, content, and direction. Proposed updates to the NPIP are reviewed and brought forward to a vote by a Congress of U.S. poultry and egg industry stakeholders and subject matter experts at the NPIP biennial conference. Proposed changes must be submitted to the NPIP National Administrative Office at least 150 days prior to the NPIP biennial conference. Proposals are shared and reviewed by the NPIP administrative staff, the NPIP official state agencies, the NPIP General Conference Committee, and the appropriate subject matter experts in the NPIP technical committees prior to the conference. NPIP official state agencies commonly host stakeholder meetings seeking input on proposed updates of significance within their respective states prior to the conference. Similarly, NPIP official state agencies commonly formulate and discuss proposed updates to the NPIP among their peers and the NPIP National Administrative Office prior to the conference. The NPIP Biennial Conference functions as a formal and extraordinarily efficient legislative body. State delegates representing one or more segments, or what they call subparts, of the U.S. poultry and egg industries consider, discuss, amend, and vote upon proposed changes or updates to the NPIP. As mentioned earlier, the NPIP has various subparts that address provisions specific to a given segment of the U.S. poultry and egg industries. A listing of the subparts for the various types of breeding and commercial poultry operations are shown here. Voting rights are specified for each state and subpart. Delegates can only cast a formal vote on proposals that have a direct impact on the specific subpart of the U.S. poultry and egg industries they represent. To provide some context to the amount of updating to the NPIP that occurs, 42 proposed updates to the 9 CFR and program standards were considered at the 2018 NPIP Biennial Conference. 36 of these proposals passed as amended and 6 failed. This number of proposals and updates undertaken for consideration at the NPIP Biennial Conference was considered to be about normal or otherwise commonplace. Once proposals have been approved at the NPIP Biennial Conference, the NPIP National Administrative Office puts together a work plan to submit to the USDA-APHIS, which is then posted in the Federal Register. USDA maintains the right to accept or reject recommendations from the NPIP Biennial Conference. If a proposal is not accepted, USDA's reasons for rejection is published in the Federal Register, after which poultry and egg industry stakeholders can provide comment. In addition, if USDA approval for a proposal is uncertain, the NPIP, the state animal health officials, and poultry and egg industry stakeholders may choose to push forward a corresponding resolution that supports the proposal through various committees at the United States Animal Health Association annual meeting. The acceptance rate of proposed updates to the NPIP that have been approved at the NPIP Biennial Conference is extremely high. Rare instances of non-acceptance may include things such as proposed updates that infer USDA financial commitments that exceed funds available. Such constraints are generally well known and openly discussed throughout the vetting process prior to and at the NPIP Biennial Conference. So we're now going to move on to discuss how the NPIP is funded. The NPIP National Headquarters and its core administrative functions are funded by federal dollars under the Avian Health Program's budget line for USDA-APHIS. It costs approximately $500,000 to run the NPIP National Administrative Office each year. Federal dollars, usually between $50,000 and $150,000, are provided to the NPIP official state agencies through cooperative agreements and are commonly used to support some level of NPIP-associated surveillance testing, participant training, and outreach. There are also some other examples of the national industry organizations providing funding to improve the overall performance and capabilities of the NPIP at a national level. The U.S. Poultry and Egg Industry Association recently funded the development of a web-based application which is being used by the NPIP official state agencies to electronically permit the movement of poultry and hatching eggs between states. Funding for the administration and implementation of the NPIP within each state varies significantly among states, but commonly comes from multiple sources, meaning the NPIP participants, through the USDA-APHIS cooperative agreements, the state departments of agriculture, and the state poultry and egg industry organization within their respective states. While the NPIP official state agencies vary substantially based upon the size and composition of the poultry and egg industries, as well as the maturity of the NPIP program within their respective state, states would commonly have anywhere from 1 to up to 3 full-time equivalents of personnel time involved in administering the NPIP within their state. As mentioned previously, it should be understood that the largest share of the heavy lifting and cost associated with implementing the NPIP occurs at the level of the NPIP official state agency and the NPIP participants themselves. So we're now going to transition to address the second primary objective of this case study, which was to answer the following question. How does the NPIP differ from or complement the secure food supply plans for the U.S. poultry industry? This seemed to be a common question that we received when we initially proposed to conduct this case study from individuals that were more intimately familiar with the U.S. pork industry and not so familiar with the U.S. poultry and egg industries or the NPIP, was that there seemed to be a general lack of understanding or some significant confusion of how the NPIP differed from or complements the secure food supply plans for the U.S. poultry and egg industries. Perhaps a less known fun fact is that the motivation to develop what are now known as the secure food supply plans, meaning secure poultry, secure pork, secure milk, and secure beef, actually began with Iowa egg producers' interest in establishing the ability to move or sell eggs from avian influenza negative premises located within a high-path avian influenza control area. Doctors Jim Roth and Daryl Trample at the Iowa State College of Veterinary Medicine worked closely with Iowa egg producers, and Dr. David Schmidt, who was serving as the state of Iowa's animal health official at that time, in the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship, and the USDA to develop and implement a voluntary program called Fast Eggs. This pilot program was initiated in Iowa in 2008 and eventually evolved into the current suite of secure food supply plans. To help further clarify how the NPIP is quite different from, but highly complementary to, the Secure Poultry Supply Plan for the U.S. poultry and egg industries, we developed this figure entitled Differences, Similarities, and Synergies between the NPIP and the Secure Poultry Supply Plan. The Secure Poultry Supply Plan is essentially the equivalent to the Secure Pork Supply Plan for the U.S. pork industry. So let's first start with the primary similarities. The NPIP and the Secure Poultry Supply Plan are both voluntary programs. They both provide standards for demonstrating freedom of disease from individual premises, and they have defined biosecurity requirements. The NPIP is unique in that it provides official USDA health status certifications that are recognized by all 50 states internationally. The NPIP is an officially recognized industry, state, and federal partnership with its documents housed in the U.S. Code of Federal Regulation, and the NPIP is routinely updated by a formal congress of industry stakeholders and subject matter experts, and the NPIP supports interstate and international commerce on an ongoing basis. The NPIP has an ongoing system of operations, verification, and certification across all 50 states, and the NPIP approves diagnostics assays and sampling strategies to inform officially recognized health status certifications. The NPIP certifies laboratories and provides a system for real-time disease surveillance across participating states on an ongoing basis. The NPIP is used to demonstrate freedom of disease from supply chains, specified segments or subparts of the U.S. poultry and egg industries, and states. The NPIP is used to demonstrate freedom of both trade-impacting diseases and non-trade-impacting diseases, and is used both inside and outside of trade-impacting disease control areas and is implemented on an ongoing basis. The Secure Poultry Supply Plan is unique in that these plans provide guidance for the enhanced surveillance, biosecurity, and reporting necessary to demonstrate evidence of freedom of a trade-impacting disease from non-affected flocks in a trade-impacting disease control area during a time of a trade-impacting disease crisis. The Secure Poultry Supply Plan aims to provide flocks within a high-path avian influenza control area a mechanism to demonstrate freedom from avian influenza and safely move non-affected poultry and egg products out of a high-path avian influenza control area and on to slaughter, sale, or further growing. Specifically, the Secure Poultry Supply Plan provides guidance on testing, biosecurity, and other reporting requirements necessary to demonstrate freedom from avian influenza at a level of confidence sufficient enough for state animal health officials to permit the movement of poultry or egg products out of a high-path avian influenza control area. Decisions to use the standards set forth in the Secure Food Supply Plans to permit the movement of animals or animal products out of a control area during a time of an animal health crisis most generally reside with the state animal health officials in both the affected states and in the states of destination. Such decisions are made on a state-by-state basis and are commonly situational-based decisions made in the midst of the animal health disease crisis. Due to the history of the high-path avian influenza outbreaks in the U.S., poultry and egg producers, poultry veterinarians, state animal health officials in the affected regions, meaning regions with history of high-path avian influenza outbreaks, are the only segment of the greater U.S. livestock and poultry industries with any first-hand experience in utilizing elements of the Secure Food Supply Plans during a foreign animal disease response. The pre-movement avian influenza PCR testing requirements, along with the lack of observable clinical signs, have been the primary elements of the Secure Poultry Supply Plans utilized to date to support the permitted movement of birds or eggs from avian influenza negative premises from high-path avian influenza control areas to date. In summary, it should be appreciated that NPIP's health status certifications are distinct from, but highly complementary to, the Secure Food Supply Plan for the U.S. poultry and egg industries. The Secure Food Supply Plans aim to help maintain continuity of business by keeping non-affected animals and products in trade-impacting disease control areas moving through the production cycle and on to market during a time of an animal health crisis. In contrast, the NPIP provides flocks, hatcheries, slaughter facilities, states, and regions outside of high-path avian influenza control areas a well-recognized platform for demonstrating freedom from avian influenza in support of ongoing interstate commerce and export market access. So we're now going to transition to discuss the relevance and considerations of the study findings to the U.S. pork industry. When considering the relevance of the NPIP to the U.S. pork industry, it is important to acknowledge both the key differences and commonalities that exist between the U.S. pork industry and the U.S. poultry and egg industries. There are many biological and life cycle differences between poultry and swine. Such differences are the key drivers in the dissimilarities between poultry, egg, and pork production, and in the animal health challenges facing the respective industries. In general, the production cycle is shorter, and the economic value of the individual animals is lower in poultry than in swine or the other livestock species. And although there is arguably more diversity among the various types of commercial and non-commercial poultry and egg operations, the commercial segments of the U.S. poultry and egg industries, both for breeding and commercial poultry, are generally more consolidated and vertically integrated than the commercial U.S. pork industry. Interstate movement of poultry and swine for further growing and harvest are common and done en masse on a daily basis. However, commercial poultry supply chains tend to be more regional in nature as compared to their counterparts in the U.S. pork industry. Endemic diseases of high consequence, most notably viral diseases, are less impactful in commercial poultry operations than in U.S. swine. The long-standing NPIP-related efforts to eliminate vertically transmitted diseases of significance from breeding poultry and the ability to remove the fertilized eggs from hens prior to hatching are both significant factors in reducing the impact. Unwarranted lateral introductions of endemic diseases of high consequence into breeding poultry are rare events as compared to the frequency of such episodes in U.S. breeding swine. That is, the infectious disease dynamics and risk for introduction of endemic diseases of high consequence into breeding stock, most notably viral diseases, differs greatly between commercial swine and poultry operations in the U.S. This apparent differences in the level of risk and observed occurrences for the lateral introduction of endemic diseases of high consequence into breeding stock may be one of the most significant health-related differences. However, the U.S. pork industry has evolved in a direction that increasingly shares more commonalities than differences with the U.S. poultry and egg industries. Commonalities include things such as adopting multi-site production methods, rearing animals in climate-controlled and biosecure facilities, having repeating systems of rearing, production, and inter-premises distribution of animals, and utilizing population medicine-based approaches towards controlling the health or pathogen status of herds or flocks, and an ever-increasing level of the association between the slaughter plants and their suppliers of animals for harvest. The U.S. pork and the U.S. poultry and egg industries have also observed similar trends in the percentage of domestic production and value being derived from export markets, most notably in the broiler industry. This growth and corresponding dependence on maintaining access to export markets is a common and highly significant issue. The U.S. pork and poultry and egg industries are also under common social and consumer pressures related to housing standards, the production methods employed, and the use of antimicrobials. The U.S. pork and the U.S. poultry industries are also primary competitors in both the domestic and global marketplace. So we're now going to transition to address the following question. Does the U.S. pork industry have any major animal health-related challenges that extend beyond the immediate influence of the individual producer, packer, or existing organization? This assessment of industry need is an obvious question. The U.S. pork and poultry and egg industries share a number of similar species-specific animal industry and veterinary organizations as shown here. However, the NPIP has no peer in U.S. animal agriculture. The NPIP is the only industry, state, and federal partnership in the U.S. that is focused on species and industry-specific animal health-related programs, definitions, standards, and rules. The NPIP is also unique in that its program definitions and standards are officially recognized at both the state and federal levels. So what are the major animal health-related challenges facing the U.S. pork industry that largely extend beyond the immediate influence of an individual producer, packer, or existing organization? Number 1. Trade impacting disease-related market risks. The U.S. pork industry has grown increasingly dependent on export markets over the past 25 years. While the total amount of pork produced in the U.S. has grown by approximately 100% since the mid-1970s, domestic consumption per capita has remained relatively unchanged. Thus, a significant portion of the growth in the U.S. pork industry since the early 1990s has been due to the purchase of pork by consumers outside of the U.S. Approximately 23% of U.S. pork is exported on a carcass weight basis, which is a tenfold increase over historical averages. This growth in exports not only increases the demand for more tonnage of pork to be produced, but also significantly enhances the value of each pig sold via the distribution of the various parts, cuts, and products for sale to markets throughout the world. Since 2012, exports have represented more than 30% of the market value realized by U.S. pork producers. Estimates in recent years suggest that export markets add approximately $50 of value to each market hog sold in the U.S. The growth in and resulting dependence upon export markets comes with a markedly different trade impacting disease and geopolitical-based market risks. While geopolitical risks are beyond the scope of this discussion, animal health-related risks affecting access to export markets are very real and highly consequential. The internationally recognized guidelines and standards related to the effect of animal health on the international trade of animal-based food products are established by the World Organization for Animal Health, or OIE. OIE standards are widely recognized by willing and interested trading partners throughout the world. African swine fever, classical swine fever, and foot and mouth disease are the three most relevant trade-impacting diseases for swine. OIE guidelines generally prohibit the exportation of fresh pork products from regions or countries with commercial livestock operations infected with or vaccinated for African swine fever, classical swine fever, or foot and mouth disease. Thus, an outbreak of any of these three trade-impacting diseases in the U.S. could be expected to result in an immediate cessation of fresh pork exports. While each trading partner can make their own decisions on the importation of pork, irrespective of the ASF, CSF, or foot and mouth disease status of the country or region of origin, the U.S. commonly accepts and follows the standards set forth by the OIE. Likewise, U.S. trading partners are likely to follow OIE guidelines for international trade, irrespective of the health status of U.S. swine. Clearly, a sudden cessation of U.S. pork exports would have a dramatic and far-reaching impact across all segments of the U.S. pork and related industries. Managing the market and industry-wide impacting risks of trade-impacting diseases is extraordinarily complicated, larger than any single approach, and beyond the ability of any individual, organization, or institution to control. Prevention, response, and recovery are each unique and critical components in managing the risks of trade-impacting diseases. While prevention and response often get their much-needed attention, recovery efforts designed to sustain commerce outside of the trade-impacting disease control areas and reestablish export markets in officially recognized regions that have demonstrated to be free of said disease can often be overlooked, despite the fact that recovery from a trade-impacting disease incursion affecting the U.S. pork industry is far more likely to be measured in months and years than in weeks. Currently, there is no officially recognized, active, and ongoing program that is inclusive of officially enrolled and certified participants and premises for the U.S. pork industry to rapidly scale up in support of regionalization-based efforts following the detection of a trade-impacting disease in U.S. livestock. The absence of a pre-existing and officially recognized system to demonstrate freedom of trade-impacting diseases across supply chains, industry segments, areas, and regions following an initial incursion and throughout the recovery phase represents a significant risk to the entire U.S. pork industry. As mentioned earlier, well-defined and practical surveillance strategies, traceability requirements, and sanitary standards are each critical components necessary to sustainably demonstrate evidence of freedom of disease across supply chains, industry segments, areas, and regions. Additionally, there seems to be a general lack of understanding, clarity, and/or broadly understood dialogue as to the specifics related to the response plans, indemnity eligibility, the payment to producers initially affected by a trade-impacting disease requiring quarantine or mass euthanasia, and the impact on packing facilities in affected areas and regions. Such a lack of clarity among industry stakeholders creates an additional level of uncertainty, delays purposeful action, and contributes to the further spread of the disease. So moving on now to major animal health related challenge facing the U.S. pork industry, number 2. Recurring endemic diseases of high consequence. Specifically, referring to lateral infections into breeding stock via the unwarranted introduction of endemic diseases such as PRRS, PDV, or Mycoplasma hypopneumoniae via something other than the direct introduction of infected pigs or semen. The levels of productivity in the U.S. pork industry have continually improved over time. Today, U.S. pork producers generate about twice as much pork with 20% fewer sows than producers just 40 years ago. So even with such success, could we even do significantly better? My sources say yes. Perhaps one of our better success stories and greatest areas of strength in the current state of the ability to manage the health of pigs in the U.S. has been the tremendous progress that has been made in the ability to confidently, repeatably, and cost-effectively control or eliminate diseases of high consequence from individual farms or networks of related farm sites. Much of this knowledge and capability has its origins in the U.S. pork industry's now 30-year-long effort to mitigate the impact of the PRRS virus. The recent lessons learned from the U.S. pork industry's PDV experience have also been very insightful. The myriad of highly collaborative public and private research effort and information sharing among veterinarians, pork producers, and researchers has greatly enhanced the understanding of the means by which diseases can be introduced into swine farms. In particular, there is a much more clear understanding and appreciation for how diseases move between farms via something other than the conventional routes of infected pigs or semen. Things such as transport vehicles, fomites, insects, feed, and aerosol transmission. Such knowledge has prompted a previously unprecedented investment in biosecurity-related infrastructure and procedural-related methodologies. These biosecurity investments have been most appreciably been focused on reducing the risk of disease introduction into boar studs, breeding herds, and breeding stock replacement farm sites. Similarly, there have been great advances in the understanding of the shed and spread of pathogens within a given farm site or premises. Such understanding has led to the now common health management practice of coupling breeding herd closure with strict all-in all-out pig flow and good sanitary procedures in farrowing facilities to eliminate a growing number of diseases from standalone breed-to-wean farms without having to depopulate the breeding herd. In short, our ability to effectively diagnose and eliminate many infectious diseases of high consequence from individual or related farm sites with all-in all-out pig flow is generally good. However, the subsequent reinfection from something other than the introduction of infected pigs or semen continues to be a primary challenge at hand. Such reinfections or lateral introductions of disease are a key explanatory variable influencing arguably our greatest challenge or weakness, meaning our ability to control or eliminate diseases across a broader area, region, state, or entire country. The capabilities and advances being made on individual farms or networks of related farm sites mentioned earlier have not translated into sustained success in being able to contain or eliminate emerging or recurring endemic diseases of high consequence across broad areas or regions of the U.S. The recurring costs and many challenges associated with mitigating and managing the growing number of recurring endemic diseases of high consequence represent a long-standing challenge to the U.S. pork industry. The infectious disease burden and ongoing recirculation of such diseases is most evident in regions with significant growing pig populations. Disease transmission within and between commercial growing pig farm sites is common and provides a reasonable environment for diseases, most notably viruses, to be maintained and indirectly move both locally and across vast distances to infect susceptible breeding stock. The applied research conducted by Lowe, Dufresne, and others in the early days following PDV's introduction into the U.S. and the myriad of field observations that have since followed have more clearly illustrated the role that unsanitized live-haul transport vehicles are playing in the movement and shed and spread of diseases in U.S. swine. In short, the continuous area-regional spread of endemic disease of high consequence are a very real and consequential challenge impacting the health of U.S. swine. Such recurring disease challenges exposes our industry-wide vulnerabilities and contributes to the ongoing investment in biosecurity and other preventative disease measures. It increases the cost of production and negatively impacts animal welfare, employee turnover, and microbial use, and ultimately the longer-term competitiveness in the broader global animal protein marketplace. So we're now going to move on to discuss the potential roles or applications for an NPIP-like program for the U.S. pork industry. Potential role or application number 1. Reduce trade impacting disease-related market risks. Proactively creating a well-defined and working and officially recognized system to sustainably support evidence of freedom of trade impacting diseases across supply chains, industry segments, areas, and regions in support of regionalization-based efforts in the event of a trade impacting disease incursion and subsequent trade impacting disease recovery phase would have tremendous value to the U.S. pork industry. NPIP's approach towards mitigating avian influenza-related market risks via the establishment of the H5, H7 avian influenza monitor classification for commercial poultry and the avian influenza clean status for participating states would seemingly present as having elements that could be applied to similar efforts for the U.S. pork industry. As mentioned, well-defined and practical surveillance, traceability requirements, and sanitary standards are each critical components necessary to sustainably demonstrate evidence of freedom of disease across supply chains, industry segments, areas, and regions. Establishing a swine health improvement plan may also be useful for advancing baseline traceability and sanitary practices and standards that indirectly impact all commercial pork production operations in the U.S. Traceability and baseline sanitary standards are critical elements in all three phases of trade impacting disease preparedness: prevention, response, and recovery, as well as in mitigating the impact of recurring endemic diseases of high consequence across areas and regions. Systems of traceability and sanitary standards associated with transporting commercial swine for breeding, further growing, or to, from, or between points of concentration are hallmark components of similar swine health programs being implemented in Denmark and the Netherlands. These systems of traceability and live haul transport sanitary standards implemented are irrespective of any pathogen-specific claims, but represent core elements of their respective swine health control and improvement programs. Establishing a U.S. swine health improvement plan may also be useful in expediting the development of and approval of well-informed and practical diagnostic testing regimens for demonstrating freedom of diseases in U.S. swine. Developing and approving diagnostic tests, sample types, and sampling strategy to confer status have long been central to NPIP's mission. Such regimens play a central role in conferring NPIP health status classifications. Establishing and approving well-characterized diagnostic assays and practical testing regimens enhances the quality, consistency, and cost-effectiveness for conferring officially recognized health status classifications. The collaborative nature of the industry, state, and federal partnership in the evaluation and approval of diagnostic assay and testing regimens through the NPIP Technical Committee, which is composed of subject matter experts from throughout the U.S., has a long track record of developing practical and cost-effective diagnostic standards for officially recognized health status classifications in the U.S. poultry and egg industries. Moving on now to potential role or application of an NPIP-like program number 2. Provision of a framework to facilitate larger scale improvements to the health of U.S. swine. In the same way as enhancing our systems of traceability, sanitary standards, and establishing common definitions for conferring officially recognized health status classifications and systems for demonstrating freedom of trade impacting diseases, a U.S. swine health improvement plan could also provide a framework and an officially recognized platform to make larger scale progress towards mitigating the effects of recurring endemic diseases of high consequence across supply chains, industry segments, areas, regions, and states in the U.S. Potential role or application number 3. Provision of an officially recognized and democratic forum. Establishing a U.S. swine health improvement plan modeled after the NPIP would create a formal, structured, and broadly represented democratic forum to engage in meaningful dialogue and directly impact swine health-related programs and policies of high relevance to the U.S. pork industry. The NPIP has shown that meaningful and focused dialogue shared amongst industry stakeholders, state agencies, and the USDA can create an environment for more informed, timely, practical, and purposeful decisions to be made and industry outcomes to be achieved. Topics of discussion range from creating officially recognized differentiations between commercial and non-commercial poultry operations, determining the requirements for the various health status classifications, approving officially recognized diagnostic tests, sampling regimens, and sanitary standards, to updating indemnity policies, eligibility, and payment rates. NPIP's operational structure creates an ongoing forum for meaningful and interactive dialogue, learning, awareness, understanding, and a more informed perspective on issues specifically related to poultry health across industry stakeholders, states, and the USDA that would not otherwise occur across such a broad and representative body of industry stakeholders. Creating such an industry-driven decision-making forum on matters pertaining to U.S. swine health among industry stakeholders, states, and the USDA would be another reason for establishing a U.S. swine health improvement plan. So we're now going to transition to discuss the potential options for how a U.S. swine health improvement plan could be structured. The basic tenets of the NPIP's operational structure is one option, but a U.S. swine health improvement plan could be established and operate under any number of different ways. Industry-only options include developing and operating a U.S. swine health improvement plan within the framework of the national and state pork industry organizations, or through the creation of a new standalone private entity operating under some type of ISO-type standard. There is a long-standing precedent in history for leaders representing the national and state pork industry and swine veterinary organizations to routinely collaborate with and provide industry perspective on issues related to swine health to their respective USDA APHIS and state animal health officials. The swine health committees of the national and state pork industry organizations were intimately involved with collaborating with the USDA and their respective state animal health officials in the development of the program policies and procedures utilized to eliminate pseudorabies virus on a state-by-state basis from the U.S. The limitation of either of these industry-only options is that any such efforts to claim an officially recognized health status across a given state or region would ultimately need to be endorsed by the state animal health official in each state making such a specified claim. The definitions and standards being used to make such claims of a status would also need to be recognized by the USDA. State animal health officials, or state departments of agriculture, are generally the responsible entities for representing regional-based claims for the health statuses within the respective state, whereas the USDA is often the responsible party for representing the health status of any collection of states, regions, or entire U.S. to international trading partners. Producers and packers, in conjunction with their respective state animal health official and state department of agriculture, could forge their own state-specific swine health improvement plans. A state-specific program would carry the benefit of having official recognition and impact within their respective state. However, the utility and recognition of such standards, definitions, and health status classifications would likely be limited to and unique to each state. It should be understood that the vast majority of animal health standards, rules, and authority resides within each state, meaning the respective state animal health official and State Department of Agriculture. Modeling and operating a U.S. swine health improvement plan after the basic tenets of the NPIP's existing structure would carry the benefit of having precedent in a working model that is well understood within the USDA and across the community of state animal health officials and departments of agriculture across all 50 states. NPIP's basic tenets include being informed and routinely updated by a democratic forum of industry stakeholders, facilitated by the USDA, adopted and administered on a state-by-state basis by official state agencies, and implemented by voluntary participants. NPIP's cooperative industry, state, and federal partnership model also lends itself to having more consistency across states and for having officially recognized health status classifications across supply chains, regions, and states that are broadly supported and recognized by state animal health officials, the USDA, and international trading partners. So we're now going to move on to discuss what would be required to establish a U.S. swine health improvement plan. Moving this idea forward would require a collaborative, concerted, and sustained effort by U.S. pork producers and packers interested in exploring, creating, and potentially participating in a U.S. swine health improvement plan. The specific hurdles and milestones would largely depend on the approach taken, meaning an industry-only option versus some sort of formal industry, state, and federal collaboration, as well as the scope, meaning a state-specific plan versus a plan for use across states. Should there be interest in wanting to claim or defend a specified health status among commercial pork producers and packing plants within a given state or region, targeted outreach in a formal collaboration with the appropriate state animals health officials and the USDA would be critical. Federal and state legislation are not thought to be required to establish such a voluntary program. Interest among pork producers, breeding stock suppliers, and packing plants in one or more states would be the foundation needed to build this concept. A significant push from interested U.S. pork industry stakeholders, a core group of interested states, and approval by the USDA APHIS leadership would be required to move forward with a program officially recognized and or facilitated by USDA APHIS. Adoption and participation in a USDA-affiliated program would then be expected to be on a state-by-state and participant-by-participant basis. Now we're going to move on to discuss what would be the potential benefits and liabilities for establishing a U.S. swine health improvement plan modeled after the basic tenets of the NPIP's industry, state, and federal partnership. The benefits, or pros, as shown here, would essentially be the same as we outlined as potential applications of a U.S. swine health improvement plan. Number 1, reduce trade impacting disease-associated market risks via the establishment of an officially recognized and working system to support regionalization-based efforts in the event of a trade impacting disease introduction into the U.S. Advancing traceability and sanitary standards, and greatly expanding the officially recognized number of diagnostic assays, test methods, sample types, and well-defined sampling regimens for determining health status and demonstrating evidence of freedom of disease across an array of various pig production farm types, settings, supply chains, areas, and regions. Benefit number 2, establishing a U.S. swine health improvement plan could provide a platform to facilitate larger scale efforts to mitigate the impact of recurring endemic diseases of high consequence on U.S. swine via certifying the health status of or related health assurance management practices for both breeding and commercial swine operations, areas and regions, and supply chains to packing plants, as well as by advancing the systems of traceability used and sanitary standards achieved. Benefit number 3 would be the value resulting from the creation of an empowered, officially recognized, and broadly represented forum to more directly inform federal and state agency policies, procedures, programs, or standards directly related to U.S. swine health. Of all the potential benefits mentioned, larger scale efforts to advance the sanitary standards and our systems of traceability across the U.S. pork industry cannot likely be understated. On-farm biosecurity practices, mitigating feedstuff-related risks, and enhancing the sanitary standards associated with transporting swine for breeding, growing, or to, from, or between points of concentration are critical control points for mitigating the spread of diseases of high consequence into and between farm sites. The infrastructure, resources, and systems necessary to consistently sanitize the masses of live haul trailers departing from or picking animals up from points of concentration are a well-recognized and costly animal health infrastructure-related challenge facing the U.S. pork industry. The previously cited research completed by Lowe and others, and innumerable observations in the post-PDV era, might indirectly suggest that live haul trailer sanitation may be one of the most critical elements in mitigating the unwarranted spread of a trade-impacting disease should one be introduced into the U.S. It seems arguable that mitigating disease transmission associated with transporting animals to, from, or between points of concentration may very well represent one of the most significant challenges and opportunities for improving the overall health of U.S. swine, as well as for reducing the larger scale, industry-wide vulnerabilities to trade-impacting diseases. Similarly, a more formal approach towards actively maintaining a current and up-to-date list of all commercial swine farm premises and an officially recognized health status for one or more pathogens endemic to U.S. swine for all commercial farms across a state or sizable region has not occurred since the pseudorabies eradication, control, and elimination program in the late 1990s and early 2000s. The infrastructure for doing so has long since diminished. And while the information management infrastructure used over the course of the pseudorabies control and eradication effort involved many people and much paper, establishing a working system for maintaining an up-to-date list of premises, officially recognized health statuses, and swine movement information, utilizing the information technologies of today, would be of tremendous benefit in any sort of larger scale disease monitoring, response, control, recovery, or elimination effort. Fundamental and broadly applicable advances in the traceability and biosecurity are infrastructure and coordination-intensive endeavors, with no short-term solutions. Instituting an active, working, and continually improving U.S. swine health improvement plan could provide a platform for tangible progress towards enhancing all three phases of trade-impacting diseases and reducing the impact of recurring endemic diseases of high consequence across broad segments of the U.S. pork industry. We're now going to transition to discuss the potential liabilities or cons for pursuing a U.S. swine health improvement plan modeled after the basic tenets of the NPIP. Number 1, time and money. Time and money would be the first and most obvious liabilities or cons that come to mind. Establishing an NPIP-like program for the U.S. pork industry would be a substantial effort that would unquestionably be a whole lot easier simply not to pursue. Much of the energies and resources required to develop and implement an NPIP-like program for the U.S. pork industry would be additive to the status quo. There may be an opportunity to leverage some of the resources within the USDA and participating states' Department of Agriculture should the development of a U.S. swine health improvement plan result in the stepwise improvements in the systems of traceability used for monitoring swine movements within the U.S. and keeping premises-level information current on an ongoing basis. These would be examples of where existing resources could be redirected, conserved with improved outcomes. However, much of the work in establishing and maintaining a U.S. swine health improvement plan would be new and different work than the status quo. As stated earlier, NPIP official state agencies and the NPIP participants themselves carry the primary burden for maintaining, continuously improving, and implementing the NPIP. Initiating and implementing a U.S. swine health improvement plan would require much industry-driven leadership, time, sustained effort, and resources. Potential liability or con number 2, uncomfortable discussions. Deriving workable definitions, standards, policies, guidelines, or rules that are agreeable among any group of people in a democratic forum is not easy under any circumstances. Even when its members are all on the same team, share common interests, motivation, expertise, and goals for the long-term success of the industry and stakeholders they represent, democracy is not easy. NPIP's biennial conference convenes to make decisions on program definitions, standards, and policies that have ongoing consequences on the health of U.S. poultry and the U.S. poultry and egg industries. The positive aspects is such decisions are being driven, debated, and decided upon by industry stakeholders that share a common interest in the sustainability and success of the various states and segments of the U.S. poultry and egg industries they represent. Thoughtful debate, compromise, practical and workable decisions, erring on the side of simplicity and flexibility are common. The NPIP has been called a democratic regulatory program in which the producer, is both the primary beneficiary and decision maker in the program's content and direction. Potential liability or con number 3. The consequences of having requirements, standards, or rules. Obtaining and maintaining a recognized certification or classification that involves an individual or entity to meet or comply with a specified set of requirements has consequences. Consequences of achieving or complying with any type of prescribed minimum standards or rules can be positive, negative, operational, financial, or unintended in nature. The benefits of any decision, standard, practice, or participation in a program with specified requirements ultimately has to be weighed against its costs and consequences. For most practical purposes, since the eradication of pseudorabies from the U.S. in 2004, there are few examples of specified health status, sanitary practice, or vaccination-related requirements or swine health-associated regulations of having a significant impact on commercial pork production operations in the U.S. Thus, there is limited recent experience with any sort of legally binding constraints on day-to-day operations concerning pig movements or particular management or sanitary practice due to the health status of an individual farm sites or the status of an area or region of origin or destination. Such flexibilities and freedom of choice are highly valued. Over this same time, there has been a previously unprecedented amount of investment and proactive efforts and management practices being implemented by pork producers to protect and improve the health, productivity, and profitability of their operations. These ongoing investments in health improvement practices and initiatives are at the sole discretion of each individual producer. In broad terms, the industry standard biosecurity-related practices and efforts to prevent disease introductions into U.S. breeding swine are among the highest of commercial livestock production globally. Such investments have come about in efforts to reduce the incidence of unwarranted lateral introductions of recurring endemic diseases of high consequence into breeding swine. Unfortunately, lateral introductions of endemic diseases of high consequences outside the conventional routes of introducing infected animals or semen continue to be a significant and ongoing challenge. So we're now going to move on to summary and conclusions. We set out to achieve 3 primary objectives in conducting this case study. Our first objective was to seek an in-depth understanding of the NPIP, what it is, why it exists, how it works, how it has evolved over time, and why it works for the U.S. poultry and egg industries. Our second objective was to clarify how NPIP differs from and complements the secure food supply plans for the U.S. poultry and egg industries. Our third objective was to assess the needs and potential applications for establishing a similar program for the U.S. pork industry, i.e., the U.S. Swine Health Improvement Plan. Our hope is that in this presentation and in the accompanying case study report provides interested parties some insight into each of these objectives. These authors' goals for the case study report is to provide a well-thought, factually correct, and practical document to introduce this topic and question raised in the case study to U.S. pork industry stakeholders. Our hope is that the case study report document and related communications can serve as a foundation for learned and thoughtful dialogue amongst U.S. pork industry stakeholders. And so you may be thinking, so what do you think about the question raised in the case study? Is it time for an NPIP-like program for the U.S. pork industry? The answer to this question is beyond the scope of these authors and the case study report. Ultimately, the decision to further explore or pursue something akin to the NPIP for the U.S. pork industry can only be determined by U.S. pork producers and packers. With that said, we will now transition into the editorial and recommendation section of this report associated with our learnings and summation of experiences. We believe the primary pros and cons associated with the question raised in the case study and highlighted in the report capture the lion's share of the considerations in play. It should be understood that establishing a U.S. Swine Health Improvement Plan modeled after the basic tenets of the NPIP, would arguably be among the more significant U.S. swine health-related undertakings in the history of the U.S. pork industry. Thus, such a decision should be well thought and taken after learned discussion, exploratory investigation, and dialogue amongst a wide array of producers, packers, veterinarians, and other U.S. pork industry leaders. Such significant undertakings in any place of business or industry as a whole would more commonly rise out of the ashes of or fear of an industry-altering crisis. However, as the graphic here that describes the 8 attributes of crisis-prepared organizations or industries suggest, perhaps we have the opportunity to more proactively and meaningfully address and mitigate the major animal health-associated challenges and risks facing the U.S. pork industry. In these authors' opinion, the primary macro level, meaning industry-wide, swine health-related risks, vulnerabilities, and opportunities for improvement are generally well understood. Our sense is that the opportunities, challenges, and risks to the U.S. and North American pork industry have not likely ever been greater. We fully realize that such significant initiatives and stepwise changes in standards of practice across any industry that go beyond the scope of any individual entity or place of business, and that may not provide a very clear and immediate financial return on an individual farm site by farm site basis, can often come as a consequence of responding to a sustained crisis situation. However, we might suggest the following few items are likely cause enough to stimulate some interest in further ferreting out the question posed in this case study on the NPIP that we've been discussing here today. Item number 1, importance of exports. The U.S. pork industry has grown markedly dependent on our ability to export high-quality pork products to consumers throughout the globe. Item number 2, U.S. per capita consumption of pork. Domestic consumption of pork in the U.S. on a per capita basis has not appreciably changed in the past 50 years. Item number 3, globalization. The globalization of our economies and society has played a key role in creating many of the aforementioned export-associated opportunities benefiting the growth and profitability of the U.S. pork industry. However, such trends have also been accompanied by an ever-increasing risk and incidence of the transcontinental movement of disease and/or other invasive pests or species. Item number 4, diversification of risk and facilitation of interstate commerce. It seems that we, meaning the U.S. pork industry, have a long ago outdated approach towards managing the animal health-related market risks to an export-centric pork industry that spans much of the lower 48 states across our vast country. Officially recognized systems for demonstrating freedom of trade-impacting diseases across supply chains, industry segments, slaughter facilities, states, and regions are needed prior to the advent of a crisis. As described earlier, the U.S. poultry industry has long had such systems in place, most notably via the NPIP avian influenza certification programs, which played a key role in facilitating ongoing interstate commerce and export market access in the midst of the 2015 high-path avian influenza crisis that was centered in the upper Midwest. Such officially recognized standards and working systems for demonstrating freedom of disease both inside and outside trade-impacting disease control areas in support of regionalization-based efforts is a highly critical component for facilitating interstate commerce throughout the recovery phase of a trade-impacting disease elimination effort. The absence of an industry-driven partnership defining such nationally recognized standards and programs related to trade-impacting diseases in partnership with our state and federal veterinary medical officials may very well create a fertile environment for a patchwork of state-by-state variability in definitions and standards to arise. Item number 5, the long-term need for healthy hogs. The U.S. pork industry has long been built on a culture of continuous improvement, and I think we'd all agree there is no shortage in the long-term need for healthy hogs for the myriad of reasons listed here. Most notably, for sustaining access to export markets, meeting the ever-increasing expectations or demands of consumers both domestically and abroad, and perhaps there is no more important need for healthy hogs and industry-driven solutions than the decreasing level of the public's interest, understanding, or empathy for the challenges facing the 21st century food animal agriculture. Number 6. Natural selection. We also think there is a reasonable and growing concern that Darwin's survival of the fittest dogma is very much alive and well as it relates to the accumulating number of viruses and associated variants, as shown here, and perhaps most notably with PRRS, that have come to fruition since the last time there was a larger scale and more formally coordinated initiative set forth in the late 1980s to eliminate pseudorabies virus from U.S. swine. The more formal movement to proceed forward with an effort to eliminate pseudorabies from the U.S. commercial swine herd was initiated just prior to the more broadly recognized emergence of the PRRS virus in the U.S. swine herd. Number 7. Learning from our peers. The graph shown here illustrates the trends in U.S. pork and broiler meat production over the course of nearly the past 60 years. Taking some notes and learning from our colleagues, peers, friends, and competitors has long been a source of continuous improvement. As this series of graphs illustrate, there is no question the U.S. pork industry has an increasingly fierce and robust competitor in the meat case, both domestically and abroad, that is increasingly touting its ability to be raised without the use of antibiotics. Item number 8. The health, viability, and prosperity of the U.S. pork industry. Last but not least, experiences suggest that such interests or concerns with issues or items that affect longer-term health, viability, and prosperity of the U.S. pork industry resides largely, if not solely, with those individuals and entities actively engaged within the U.S. pork industry. Our sense is that the next generation of practical solutions for mitigating the grand animal health-related challenges facing the U.S. pork industry can only come from the expertise, leadership, and collaborative spirit that resides within the U.S. pork industry stakeholder community. So perhaps the following is the primary question at hand. Do you believe the current systems and approach of animal health control in the U.S. can deliver the larger scale swine health assurance solutions necessary to support the needs of the 21st century U.S. pork industry? That could be perhaps best characterized as being export-centric, highly mobile, and composed of a vast network of multi-site and multi-state production systems. Our sense is that we can and need to do better, and that the U.S. pork industry stakeholders deserve better. Continuous improvement has long been a core and guiding principle across the U.S. pork industry. Next-generation solutions are needed to support the export-centric industry of today in the increasingly globalized world of our time. Significant and systematic improvements are needed to strengthen all three phases of trade-impacting disease preparedness: prevention, response, and recovery, as well as to enhance our ability to more effectively control, mitigate, or eliminate diseases of high consequence on a broader area, regional, or industry-wide level. Collaboration and industry-driven leadership are the most critical elements needed. Such grand challenges are bigger than any one individual, organization, or entity. History suggests sustainable improvements to the health status of swine herds across large areas, regions, states, or entire country require industry leaders to set forth simplistic, practical, strategic, and effective baseline standards of practice that can be widely adopted by commercial pork producers. Industry-led leadership, collaboration, adaptability, constancy of purpose, and consistency of execution across the masses have been the hallmarks of our historical successes. Globalization, multi-site production, and a markedly increased dependence on exports have each contributed to a substantial change in the overall landscape of swine health and trade-impacting disease-related market risks in the U.S. pork industry. It seems arguable that investments and advancements in our animal health-related systems and infrastructure that extend beyond the individual producers or packers' farm gate have not kept pace with the needs of such a highly mobile, interconnected, and export-centric industry. The 4 items listed here are examples of beyond the farm gate U.S. swine health related infrastructure items that each present as areas of high consequence with reasonably well understood opportunities for improvement. While the current barriers to more fully address or close each of these gaps vary in their costs and complexities, perhaps the good news is that the barriers are largely not technical in nature. In broad terms, substantial improvements to the status quo are matters of raising awareness, mitigating some unnecessary bureaucracy, and matters of priorities, choices, organizations, leadership, and resources. Our sense is that the solutions to the major animal health-related challenges facing the U.S. pork industry can only come from those individuals and entities most personally vested and committed to the long-term success of the current and next generation of the U.S. pork industry. Experience affirms that solutions offered by government or industry, each acting independently, will not be timely, capable, or robust enough to keep pace with the industry's needs. State and federal animal health agencies lack the resources, capacity, and industry-specific know-how. Industry solutions lack the coordination and authority to establish official standards and health status certifications across legally recognized areas, states, and regions, or by well-defined segments of the U.S. commercial pork industry. The findings of this case study provide the U.S. pork industry stakeholders some insight into NPIP's role in reducing the impact of endemic diseases of high consequence in the U.S. poultry and egg industries, as well as its more recent expansion and pivot towards mitigating trade impacting related market risks. NPIP is a proven and continuously evolving industry, state, and federal partnership working across all 50 states that has long been used to safeguard and better the health of U.S. poultry and the competitiveness of the U.S. poultry and egg industries. The basic tenets and approach used by the NPIP could serve as a roadmap for U.S. pork producers and packers interested in more directly and systematically addressing the major swine health-related issues of high consequence, and better positioning the future of the U.S. pork industry in the domestic and global marketplace. So now back to the question raised in this case study. Is it time for an NPIP-like program for the U.S. pork industry? The considerations in play are not likely so much about today as they are about the potential for creating a pathway for a better, more robust, and less vulnerable U.S. pork industry of tomorrow. Asset and larger scale industry preservation and helping safeguard the opportunities and way of life for the breadth of industry participants and their local communities come to mind. Such decisions are less about 2020 as much as they are about 2025 and beyond. We don't subscribe to the line of thought that there are any short-term fixes to the major swine health-related challenges facing the U.S. pork industry. Next-generation solutions are needed to more fully and effectively address these more complex swine health-related challenges that extend beyond the scope of an individual producer's or packer's farm gate. While there are no short-term solutions to the major swine health-related challenges at hand, as depicted in this pictorial, addressing and making stepwise progress in addressing these major challenges all seems doable with the more than adequate diversity of skills, practical know-how, collaborative spirit, and innate pursuit of continuous improvement that exists across the expanse of the U.S. pork industry. Collaboration and industry-driven leadership are the most necessary elements for success, and this effort will most certainly require a mix of both offense and defense to make meaningful progress on these challenges of our time. So in closing, a few takeaway recommendations. Our personal learnings over the course of this study and experiences suggest that U.S. pork industry stakeholders have a limited understanding of NPIP. While distributing study findings via conventional mediums of printed word, continuing education forums, and perhaps a narrated video presentation or podcast will help in introducing this topic and question raised to industry stakeholders, Our thoughts are that smaller group, more regional settings that provide for more two-way communication, question answer, and feedback would be preferred and most effective. Interest, leadership, and participation among some portion of the U.S. pork packing sector would be a foundational element necessary to initiate any type of voluntary program that includes an aim of supporting export market access for fresh pork in the event of the introduction of a trade-impacting disease into the U.S. Voluntary animal health or animal health management practice assurance programs being required at a point of sale seem to be a common model globally. NPIP's more than 80 years of implementation and evolution need to be acknowledged when determining what would be just the first steps towards establishing a similar program for U.S. swine. Identifying the initial areas of emphasis, focus, and tangible first deliverables will be critical when considering the potential for initiating an NPIP-like program for the U.S. pork industry. This figure serves to provide a summary of the primary potential components or areas of emphasis that could be included in a U.S. swine health improvement plan. These include, in no particular order, number 1, establishing systems for being able to demonstrate evidence of freedom of trade-impacting diseases by premises, supply chains to slaughter facilities, industry segments, areas, states, and regions that are outside of trade-impacting disease control areas. Number 2, deriving officially recognized health status classifications associated with recurring endemic diseases of high consequence for both breeding stock and commercial farm types. Number 3, developing traceability standards for the various types of inter-premises swine movements necessary to support a given program-specific certification. Number 4, originating sanitary standards related to on-farm practices, safety of the feed supply, and/or live haul transport necessary to support a given program-specific certification. It is thought that any traceability and sanitary standards associated certifications would be irrespective of pathogen. And last but not least would be establishing a glossary of officially recognized program-specific terms. Examples would be things that would include developing clear definitions for things such as the various types of premises, operations, pigs, swine movements, industry segments, diagnostic specimens, live haul transport trailers, and/or levels or degrees of live haul transport sanitation. Establishing clear definitions of program-specific terms is an important component in the development of any sort of officially recognized certification or standard. In summary, should there be interest in further exploring the establishment of something akin to the NPIP for the U.S. pork industry, determining a preferred organizational structure and identifying areas of common interest that have both a high and relatively near-term impact would seem like a logical place to start. 2 additional recommendations that extend beyond the scope of this case study include, number 1, there may be value in conducting a similar study of other nationally and internationally recognized swine health assurance or certification type programs being implemented elsewhere in the world for comparative purposes. Most notably in Denmark and potentially the Netherlands would be ones to consider. Similarly, completing an in-depth review of the primary infrastructure, systems, and practices that would likely need to change in the event of an extended trade-impacting disease recovery period in the U.S. may also be valuable. These additional inquiries may be useful for comparative purposes and in providing some context to the changes and improvements that are and will be needed to support a highly competitive, export-centric U.S. pork industry well into the future. So in closing, we would like to thank you for your time and interest in this case study, and we would welcome your questions and feedback. We hope that the information shared in this presentation and in the accompanying and more comprehensive case study report is of value. Our hope is that this case study report can serve as a foundation for thoughtful and learned dialogue on this topic and the question raised in this case study among U.S. pork industry stakeholders. Conducting this study was certainly a very rewarding educational opportunity and learning experience for these authors. So with that, we thank you and we'll sign off.